Hello and welcome to the Santee Church of Christ Bible Study Rewind, where we look at the last lesson we just studied last Sunday, in case you need to get caught up and catch up with the rest of the class. Now we are in Deuteronomy, and we studied Deuteronomy 19 last week, and part of chapter 20 as well. Essentially, in this part of the dispensation of the law, God is including these nationalistic laws: where to worship, how to worship, what festivals are to happen, and these basic overall laws that affect the entire nation. All the laws affect the entire nation, but eventually he'll be getting down to specific laws for individuals to do in specific instances. Right now he's kind of painting with a very broad brush for how they are to judge specific things on a national level. So we're not going to read the text. We're just basically going to go over what we spoke about and what the questions were very quickly. So chapter 19 goes over and talks about the cities of refuge. And then he gets into the practice of deceit, and most specifically when people want to practice false witnessing, which we see extends as an important law all the way into the time of Christ. And then there were some instructions in the first part of chapter 20 about who should not go to war. In other words, there were specific instances when God had provisions for specific people who were not to go to work. So in chapter 19, verses 1 through 13, God covers the parameters for these cities of refuge. And the cities of refuge were to be led and really inhabited by the Levites. The Levites inherited these cities. There were 3 on the western side, 3 on the eastern side eventually, and they were to be their inheritance because God is considered the inheritance for the Levites. They are not going to receive any regions of property. So this was their inheritance, were these cities. And so what happens in these cities? Well, apparently, if you accidentally killed someone, their relatives could exact some sort of vengeance or recompense on you, and out of anger. And so there was this provision for that you avenged, if somebody in your family was killed by somebody, you could avenge their death. Now, in the cases where, say, you're out and you're swinging an axe, and this is actually what the word says, if your axe head flies off and kills somebody by accident, you will not receive a judgment of execution for murder. It was an accident. So if you could run to one of these cities before the avenger could catch you, you could live in that city, and you could live there peacefully, and you could live there. And then we learned later that after the priest dies, you are free to leave. Now I don't know if the avengers could still go after you or what, but that was kind of a condition for people who commit manslaughter. Or accidental death, really, is what that is. Not something that somebody did purposefully. The flip side of that of the law says, if you lie in wait for somebody, in other words, if you're doing this out of hatred, then you will be executed by the law. And if you run to these cities, it won't matter. If it is known that you did this, out of spite, or you were lying in wait for somebody, you would be executed. So we see in in 15 through 21, we see this reiteration of how many people it takes to convict somebody legally. But before we do, we see something very interesting where it says, you shall not remove your neighbor's landmark, which you formerly set in your inheritance. So he's telling you, he just kind of inserts this law about people not moving your neighbor's landmark. So you would have stones or something set up to say that's the corner of this property and that property and that property. And if you move it to benefit you, that's a deceptive thing. And that kind of opens up what he gets into next, where he talks about what was required to convict a crime and what was to happen to a malicious witness. And this is found in verses 15 through 21. So 2 or more witnesses are required to exact judgment against somebody. You can't charge somebody with just one witness. Now, this isn't the first time it's been brought up, but now it talks about what to do when somebody's found out to be laying a charge of false witnessing. If somebody falsely accuses another, you shall do to him as he plotted to do to his brother. Life shall go for life, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Whatever the punishment was to be against the accused is levied against the accuser, the false accuser. Is this just, was my question. And I think we all seem to think this seems like a just recompense. We don't see that nowadays. You can take a person to court, and if you're falsely accusing them, you can back out of it fairly easily. And so you see that this is so important. You see it even in Jesus' day, when people were looking to have him falsely convicted of anything. They couldn't find anybody, because what was the quote unquote justice due to a man who calls himself the Son of God? Well, it was death. So if you're accusing a man of something that would require his life, and you are found to be a false accuser, then your life would be required as well. So we see that extending as a very important law for the Jewish community well into the lifetime of Jesus as well. And so in these types of cases, there is not to be an emotional attachment. God says, don't have pity on that person who does that, and you need to exact justice on him. There needs to be an emotional detachment from that person. Your eye shall not pity. We have to assume that anger or vengeance would never be a motive for the judges in these cases. So in the first part of chapter 20, verses 1 through 9, there are these instructions about war. We're still talking these nationalistic type level laws. Who did not have to go to war? Well, the one who built a house but didn't dedicate it. The one who planted a vineyard but who didn't eat of its fruit. The one who is betrothed and yet hasn't taken his wife yet. Or the one who is afraid. And the reasoning is, if somebody dedicates a house and he dies, somebody else will dedicate his house. Or if he has a vineyard but hasn't had its fruit, somebody else will have his fruit. And if someone is betrothed yet hasn't taken his wife, somebody else will end up taking her for a wife. And if somebody is afraid, it was just a pragmatic thing. You don't want everybody else becoming afraid because you have one person who is afraid. And so we see these things taking out of a sense of justice and equity, and considering that a person should enjoy the fruits of their labors and that sort of thing. It's just, you see God doing this throughout all of these, where he expects a certain amount of holiness, purity, and justice. And we're going to see later on in a couple of chapters here a lot of compassion, a lot of giving of yourself, loving your neighbor, that sort of thing. Those things will be coming up. that covers it. That's pretty much what we talked about. There was a lot of discussion, obviously. We only covered that little bit right there, that chapter 19, a little bit of chapter 20. So we'll be getting in this next one. We'll be finishing up chapter 20 and likely chapter 21 as well. If you'd like to be a part of the class, you can get in on our email list, and we'll send you the link to get into that class. We do it over Google. We also have a class on Wednesday night. We are in 1 Peter. We're finishing that one up. Same thing. It's on Wednesday at 7:30. And the Sunday classes at 3 p.m. on Sunday. So thank you. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in class. It's just a Bible study where we all want to get together and discuss those things that God wants applied to our lives today, even from these many, many years ago. God has not changed. He still loves us. He still wants us to be his people. Thank you for listening, and may God continue to bless us always. Thank you.